Ron throttles up. He's on a record-breaking pace.
We could tell he was really picking him up and putting him down.
With his pit crew holding their collective breath, Ron hits fourth gear, flying at 175 miles an hour. If he's going to break the 200-mile-an-hour barrier, he's got to hit that nitrous booster now. And he does. 3/4 of the way across the mile-and-a-half track, Ron's still on record pace. But suddenly, there's trouble. Ron's hit 2 tiny divots along the surface. At 185 miles an hour, that's enough to throw the bike off balance and into a high-speed wobble.
What flashes through your mind is that this is going to get ugly, and get ugly quick.
Lee's right. A split second later, disaster.
I saw Ron kind of leap up in the air and then come off the back of the bike. And the bike started dragging him at speed. This had to be 175, 180 miles an hour.
But what you can't see is Ron's right racing boot wedged in a seat bracket. He's tied to the out-of-control bike.
It looked like one of those old-time Western movies where the guy gets shot out of the saddle, and as he falls, his boot gets hooked in the stirrup, and the horse drags him along.
Ron twists, trying desperately to free his boot. Mercifully, it works, and Ron rolls to a violent stop.
I jumped out of the truck and ran over to him. It had pretty well burned through his leathers in several spots. It had taken his face shield off. His eyes and his nose and his mouth were packed full of dirt.
Ron is dragged nearly 1/4 mile across the desert floor. At 180 miles an hour, the friction makes it feel like he's skidding on the face of the sun. Thanks to his thick racing leathers, with armor protection in the knees, elbows, and shoulders, Ron walks away with only a minor case of road rash.
Thank the Lord that I'm still here. Minor injuries, not too bad. I do plan to run again. I still want to get the 200-mile-an-hour record.
A lesser man may have taken this as a sign to retire from the sport. Ron still had unfinished business.
Incredibly, less than 2 weeks later, Ron is back in the California desert to take one more shot at the 200-mile-an-hour record that almost killed him.
Still a little bit of nervousness there. Just got to get back on the saddle, do it again. But I'm just optimistically cautious.
At the signal, Ron shows no sign of nerves and takes off full throttle. And then this happens.
All we saw was dirt, Ron, bike, flying through the air. It was probably the most horrendous bike accident I'd ever seen. In my mind, not a survivable accident.
Motorcycle daredevil Ron Cook is a man on a mission. He's determined to break the 200-mile-an-hour motorcycle land speed record. His first attempt at the mark ended like this. To everyone's amazement, Ron walked away with just a bad case of road rash. Now, just 2 weeks later, he's at another organized speed trial, this one in El Mirage in the California desert, revved up for another run at the record. But Ron's concerned about the track's surface.
Dirt here is all broken up. I don't like riding that loose stuff because it can get kind of squirrely. I've been in some loose stuff before, but not quite as bad as this.
Ron's concerned, but not willing to postpone his attempt. It's got to be at a sanctioned event for it to be official. Ron revs up his nearly 300 horsepower, 500-pound nitrous-injected Kawasaki 900 and rockets off the line.
With the incident 2 weeks earlier, now everybody was keeping a close eye on Ron.
Friend and fellow racer Lee Kennedy watches at mid-track as Ron lights up the course.
He was flat clicking it coming up the course.
It appears to be a record run. But as Ron crosses the finish line, disaster strikes a second time.
Rider down, everybody move.
It was almost instantaneous. All we saw was dirt, Ron bike flying through the air. The first crash unfolded. The second crash was just instant violence.
The problem starts when Ron hits that loose patch of salty sand at the end of his run, causing the tires to lose traction and the bike to go into another high-speed wobble. Ron is launched off at 200 miles an hour. The bike disintegrates.
Where the bike before stayed on its wheels and kind of putted away, this time it was in a lot of different pieces.
Paramedics rush to the scene. This time, Ron doesn't walk away.
Ron wasn't moving. You could tell that some of his parts were not pointing in the right direction. Our immediate concern was he breathing? Is he alive?
Ron breaks 9 bones and suffers third-degree burns and abrasions from rolling across the desert floor at 200 miles an hour.
Here at home recuperating. It's been about 2 weeks after the 9-day hospital stay.
It takes 2 years for Ron to recover, but he lives to tell an amazing story.
The crash at 200 miles an hour was much more violent than the first one. On the first crash, when I jumped off, I was trying to separate myself so that I would let the motorcycle go ahead of me, but what ended up happening was I ended up getting dragged on that one. On the second crash, I said, no matter what, I'm gonna hang on, because last time it didn't work when I jumped off. So that's what I did, I just hung on. It didn't work though, it just pitched me off and bucked me just like I was on a Bronco. When I finally stopped rolling and sliding on the dirt, first thing I saw was a bright blue sky and a shining sun. And I thought to myself, well, shoot, I must have died.
But why he survives is no accident. It was the daredevil's survival instincts.
I knew there was one thing I could try to do, and that was to make my body limp and be like a rag doll and just let it tumble, let it happen.
Ron assumes that relaxed ragdoll position and barrel rolls down the track for 588 feet. That's almost the length of 2 football fields.
The hardest thing I've ever had to do, physically and mentally, was to let go of all your reflexes, because naturally you want to tense up. That's just human nature. You want to tense up and stop. So I reconstructed the bike as you see it today, as it was scooped up off the desert floor.
Now retired from racing, Ron has preserved the bike to remind him of those 2 terrible days in the desert.
The leathers and my uniform, my safety equipment, the helmet, the gloves are all original from the day I wrecked, as well as all the motorcycle parts. And as you can see, it broke into probably about 140 pieces. It just disintegrated.
Ron has one more reminder, his 13th record. But it's not exactly the record he was looking for. Ron is now in the Guinness Book of World Records as the only man in history to survive a crash at 200 miles an hour.
Rider down, everybody move.
He still doesn't have the one that almost killed him twice, but Ron doesn't sound too upset.
Everything I'm doing right now is all an extra bonus because I should have died on the racetrack that day. So life is blessed. Live every day as if it's your last day.